Hey, everybody, and welcome. My name is Jordan. I'm our senior partner manager at Intellistack, and we are extremely excited today to kind of drop in on a chat between Max and Christina. Christina is with Hike2, one of our certified partners, and they specialize in the legal tech space. And Max is our corporate counsel or internal counsel. And so, what we want to do today is talk through a new offering from Intellistack, our Contract Lifecycle Management tool, or you'll often hear it referred to as our CLM. And these two will kind of be a fireside chat as they dig into what is a CLM, is it the right fit for you, and if so, how do you move forward? And with that, Max, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm Max Brennan, corporate counsel here at Intellistack. I've spent most of my legal career in-house and started in legal ops with an internship in law school. So this is definitely a great area for me. Love talking about it. In the past 5 or so years, I've done 3 different CLM implementations at really different sort of areas of the market. So we have kind of the enterprise level tool. I've worked with Ironclad, kind of have the SMB tool with Lexion, and then I've also done a homebrew Jira implementation. So between those pieces, I feel like I've gotten a pretty good sense both from an administrator implementer as well as end user standpoint on what works really well and what might not work so well.
That's perfect. Yeah, appreciate that. And then Christina, pass it over to you.
Yeah, hi. It's great to be here with you all. Max, I think probably the craziest thing you said was like doing an internship in law school and then like ending up in your career doing like exactly that. My path is pretty opposite, I guess. So for everyone sort of listening in, I'm Christina Natale. I'm the director of legal strategy and advisory at Hike2. We're a full stack cloud data and innovation consultancy, largely with highly regulated industries, but certainly specifically with law firms. My background is about 8 years actively in the practice of law on the sort of high volume and complex litigation side. And so most of my sort of experience really was with, early sort of automation and innovation in that sort of case management and litigation realm. The last few years of practice started to take more of an operational role, and certainly sort of in that full life cycle of full client life cycle, really, not so much necessarily contract life cycle, right? But CLM in terms of, anywhere from sort of lead generation, referral management, some of those contract type stuff. In that realm. And then finally came to Hike2, where we really are advisory and design and implementation and training and change management, everything sort of consultancy. So really getting to work with more of our kind of corporate and law firm clients in any technologies that they're finding they need.
Yeah, perfect. I appreciate you, laying that all out, and very excited to chat with you both today about kind of like our new tool, that Contract Lifecycle Management. CLM is kind of how we'll be referring to it. And so the first kind of question that I have for you both is, we didn't invent CLM. So like CLM isn't a new concept. And when you think about Contract Lifecycle Management today, what are maybe some of the biggest frustrations that legal teams might face on a daily basis or just in their kind of everyday lives when they're dealing with the CLM tool? Max, I can kind of start that with you.
Yeah. So in terms of, I've taking just a quick step back here. I think a lot of companies don't even have CLM. So it's kind of, even in that before state, you run into a few core pain points that sometimes can be solved by a CLM or sometimes can just be worsened by one, depending on how it goes. So really, I feel like the before state for a lot of companies, whether or not they have a CLM, is you really have a lot of your contract data living in a lot of different places, maybe being tracked in a spreadsheet. Negotiations will happen over email. Red lines live in Word, and you have no idea where the versions are. That kind of essentially chaos leads to a lot of pain points that we see across organizations. I feel like a lack of visibility for the business is a big one. Obviously, legal works very closely with many different functional areas, and their lack of visibility definitely impacts our ability to do our work. Also, pretty high risk of errors from manual data entry and poor version control. If you don't know where your data lives, how to use it, that can be a pretty big issue. And then finally, I find a lot of legal teams spend a good bit of their time on admin work, essentially low value admin work, where they're not providing strategic counsel and advice to the business or negotiating an agreement. They're really spending more of their time on that tracking version control aspect. So those are some of the main pain points that I see. And depending on how a CLM is implemented, it can either really help with those or not really scratch the surface in terms of making improvements.
I think that's a really good, it's funny, because you talked about the chaos. I was going to take sort of the same step back and start from like what sorts of challenges are law firms looking to solve, and sort of divorced from with a CLM, right? Like, what are the problems they're trying to solve? And I always sort of think of it like in my head as like a process flow of like, what sort of data are we trying to get where? Or what data do I need to make X decisions, things like that. And again, when you said the chaos, it sort of brought me down another track, which is you mentioned a few different sort of business challenges that I think sort of is where we're going, which is when we ask that question, divorce of CLM, what is the challenge we're trying to solve? Many of the ones that you mentioned are sort of, given if we have the right solutions in mind, or at least understanding, once we've said, what is this problem and what maybe it is, manual data entry, maybe it's data that's siloed across different systems, things like that, a lack of insights from all of that data. If we are moving towards sort of, and I know maybe I'm getting ahead of myself, but like where is this CLM world going? What are the capabilities that we expect of a modern CLM? Or again, is CLM the answer at all to any of these questions? When we bring it back to that level, a lot of the challenges that you expressed, I think, can and sort of maybe must be solved by a modern CLM if it's going to adequately resolve the challenges that we're facing.
Completely agreed there. Yeah, Jordan, let us know if we should jump in there or.
Yeah, well, let's go kind of freestyle of it a little bit. Let's kind of go right to that. What does like the modern CLM, like if a modern CLM is going to be put in place to kind of solve modern issues, let's kind of like, what does that look like? Max, yeah, kick it off.
Yeah, so really jumping off of Christina's point here, I think once we kind of define the pain points and the problems, then we can start talking about solutions. And I think a big part of that discussion is around integrations. So like a really strong bidirectional integration with your CRM, which is likely Salesforce, if we're being honest, is going to be a huge driver of value. So for example, when sales teams can kick off contracting workflows in Salesforce, see the status in real time, I feel like adoption at both the line level and on the leadership side really goes up. Gives the visibility they need and definitely keeps them working in the system that they already use. They don't need to go out to a different CLM. It all works in Salesforce. So I feel like that's one of the areas that we've invested in pretty heavily, is making sure that that Salesforce CLM integration piece is strong. And just one other point here, and then I'll hand it back to Christina. Building on that piece with the integrations are definitely helpful, but then if you can pull all of those into a unified workflow, so you can leverage data from a Salesforce, let's say an Airtable or other sources, into a single data fabric, leverage that information throughout the CLM lifecycle. I think that can offer a whole lot of value where other tools don't have a ton in the way of integrations.
I think that's a great point, and you're right. It sort of does kind of directly jump off from where I was sort of going with it. And to your earlier point, we talked about sort of the chaos that we're trying to solve and not wanting to sort of create, right? Depending on the solution that's selected, and B, the implementation. There's a lot of ways that things can kind of go crazy, that we can create accidentally, certainly, usually unintentionally, create more chaos. And some of that comes from like when we ask the question of like, to your point about workflow, that sort of integrated workflow, sometimes we think about integrations and it's sort of come from this for good reason, this sort of school of thought of like, how can we integrate as much of as possible of our systems? Like, how can we really bring our tech stack together so that we don't have silos? But in some instances, we're just like, okay, great. Like, I need to integrate with these 8 things, and not really thinking about the why, and what should be integrated. And so, to your point, really, I think the goal of integration here, while it may be data, it really is sort of workflow. It's kind of like, where do we need certain pieces of data throughout the contract life cycle? Where are they coming from in our current stack? And again, sort of, right? Like, are we creating more problems? Are we creating more intricacies? Or sort of is a functionality of this tool A, integrated workflow? Certainly. I think that's a really huge one. And then B, as part of that sort of work, is sort of like a workflow redesign question. Do we have capabilities in this new sort of system that we're trying to select that maybe sort of reduce the need for some of those A, integrations, but B, maybe redundancies or manual efforts that we talked about, like say extracting data from an unstructured document, right? And just to start with that example, yes, it is certainly, we should absolutely be thinking about, if my X data fields live in my CRM, when and where do I need them in when I'm making these contract decisions, but also, do I need that integration? And again, when it's that simple, when it's fully integrated, yeah, sure, why not? But if it's somewhere else, if it's not Salesforce, if it's not your CRM, where is that data coming from? And is there a better way for us to sort of utilize it throughout the life cycle without duplicating, replicating, transforming, loading, all of these things? How do we get that data in the user's hands when they need it, in a better or cleaner way?
I think that that's a really good point, and kind of building off of that one thing you said in particular around kind of the process design piece, that kind of goes back to both sort of a core pain point that we see around, like, legal teams might not have done a whole lot of work to define their process very clearly. They might have something that works, but they haven't taken the time to sit down. I mean, now I feel like I'm dating myself, but like Microsoft Project or something like that, they haven't really mapped everything out in the steps. I think that's where our CLM does offer sort of really helpful capacities when it comes to the visual workflow builder. And I feel like that drag and drop interface, to your point, Christina, can really like bring out places in your process where things don't make sense. You might be pulling in information too early, too late. You might not need a certain step. And I think that comes through much more clearly when you're not working in the process day to day and you actually get to take a step back and look at it. I think on that front as well, having a visual workflow builder does help a lot on the low effort of administration. I think there, to Christina's point, you can map your process, but then when that changes, I think the visual workflow builder is a huge asset in terms of saying, oh, I need this approver here where I didn't have one before. You drag and drop it in. That, in my experience, is a lot simpler than some of the more full-fledged enterprise level tools. which while they have a lot of customization capabilities, actually making those customizations takes a lot of clicks and a lot of knowledge.
That's a really good place to sort of go from here. It's exactly where I was thinking. I think like you said, being able to just see that process visually and is great. The customization piece, I think, is where we get stuck a lot. And like, I will again abstract it another layer first, and then maybe bring it back to a really tight CLM example that I saw really recently. But we do a lot of implementations of a lot of different, software for a lot of different things. And a lot, almost always, we sort of get into this sort of pickle of like people. It's one thing to choose a system because it's integratable with your tech stack. It's another to choose it because, oh, this is really customizable. And where I think it gets really sort of, again, where you start to see some of that chaos is that just because you can customize something, A, doesn't mean you can customize it well, or B, maybe that you should. And so I would think more like configuration versus customization. And that's really why I love that sort of visual workflow is, like you said, you can sort of start to see the downstream effects of like, okay, if I tweak this, what is it doing and where? The biggest sort of CLM specific example I could think of, again, going back to your point, it is sort of this, okay, we've had this standard contract template forever. But now we're adding in this new term. And you sort of have to think through, again, when we're talking about like contract interpretation, contract sort of, what are the impacts of, having these terms or not having them? How are we going to go back retroactively and say, apply this to all of the contracts that came before it? Can we? Do we need to? Well, we need to from here moving forward. And so not only is it sort of helpful to see where in the process that decision lies so you can understand what branches off of it. But on the data side, again, to that customization piece, like how complicated is it going to be for us to not only build that term in here, but understand what it means to have that term, what are the implications of having it there? And again, full circle, where do we now need that data outside of this CLM piece of the puzzle? Where else in our tech stack might we need that data, and how can we get it there? I think those are all sort of related, but they tend to compound upon each other. Issues that a lot of the time, to your point, we don't see necessarily, at least in a simple way, in the enterprise solutions, because they think, right? Like if we think source of, system of truth, source of truth, it's easy to be like, this is the system of truth for everything everywhere. And right, like, how do we get it all in here? And again, to the point, sometimes that's not the case. We need to know when data should not, maybe when the CLM should not be the system of truth for something as well.
So taking it similarly specific, I had another example from previous life where I think having these capabilities would have made my life a whole lot easier. There was one, so we had a company where business had great growth potential, but a lot of our contracts had really restrictive uplift caps at renewal, so we couldn't necessarily raise our prices to reflect the value that we were generating. So basically, to your point, we needed to capture all of that information as of time X, which was we have a lot of caps, and we captured that all in our repository. Now, to your point, going down the line, when we actually go out, amend those agreements, then what we want to do is not only capture the fact that we've amended that in the repository, but we also want that to flow into Salesforce so that CPQ can leverage that when it runs its process, when billing runs their process, we need it to talk to NetSuite. Those pieces are all really important. And when I was doing this, it was all manually updated in the various systems each time we sign an amendment. If that could all just be automated, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, for sure. And to your point too, I always will add another layer of complication here. Sorry. But you mentioned red lines, and like again, that's a really good point. When we're looking at an integrated workflow that maybe starts in our CRM, that starts in Salesforce, to your point, where and when are those approvals happening, and are they being reflected back to, again, what is our sort of system of record, or maybe even we'd say, like, I don't know, system of inception here, right? Like, where is the contract workflow originating, and is the data up to date there? Has the final result of what is captured in the PDF document of the signed executed contract, is that captured for, to your point, the next time that we're like, oh, we want to, engage in this sort of optimization effort. We want to modernize all of our contracts, or we want to add this term that will make them all sort of equally robust, what have you. Is it reflected that in the current version that is, active, that is in effect, is that term has that term been, adopted, and or, how do we amend it? So I think that's a really great sort of, like you said, I think we always look back and say, man, I wish I had X when I was, in practice. That would have been amazing. I think that's some of the times where we get the best sort of, improvements and innovation in this space. We don't have a lot of, I think I'll just add one other layer or wrinkle, which is that most I think tech products largely did not start as like legal tech, or really with the idea of the legal sector in mind, the legal industry in mind. And so I think it's really cool that a lot of more of these modern products really come from, and that sort of like, we've been in the trenches and we're designing this product to address these real challenges. I think is a really good thing as well.
Couple of points to jump off from there that I really appreciated. I think to your point, a lot of the previous generation of CLM tools that are out there in the market were kind of designed for potentially different audiences than legal. Like, I know that one in particular was really designed and marketed for sales leadership rather than legal. And I think sort of similarly, there's another product that I'm aware of where they haven't really architected their solution from the ground up to reflect AI, which is kind of the other really big innovation that I think is going to have a huge impact on the CLM space. Not only the pre-signature workflow piece around redlining and edits and summarizing those changes, making those changes, but then, Christina, to your point, kind of once we capture that information from that final PDF document that we've both signed and agreed to, we capture that information, we store that information somewhere, but then in terms of leveraging it quickly and effectively, once we have a new question around maybe not uplift terms, but renewal terms, that's where we might want to leverage the capabilities of AI to do a natural language query of our repository, pull that information out either from the structured metadata that we pulled or unstructured. That's one of the really exciting things that I think CLM solutions that are architecting nowadays can really build in the AI functionality from the ground up, as opposed to trying to retrofit their infrastructure to make it work.
I think that obviously is really exciting to me. I'm like, we could talk about AI use cases for this all day. But again, to the point, I think it goes back to really the integrations as a key component here, because again, not only, and again, sort of my point of like, do we need this to be the system, the source of truth of everything? Like, do we have to build out a million? I think that's sort of like, again, really, it's sort of one of those I wish I had back when I was practicing in any sort of technology, but certainly here, right? We think about like, do I want or need, is there a universe in which I need to create like every single possible field to house every single piece of data from this? And to your point about natural language, which I just think is so cool, and where things are going, is And like, if it's free text, if it's not just like a yes or a no, if it's anything more complicated than like a pick list or like whatever, is that data even valuable? Like, are there so many, different, combinations or ways that people might frame it? Or you never know, like maybe we did a really poor job negotiating and we're stuck with somebody else's terms that are like way not in line with what we usually do. And I'm just being ridiculous here, right? But how do we house that data? And so again, really thinking through, like, is there a need to have a field that encompasses, that for every single one of those fields? Or again, is some other system the source of where that, right, that conditional logic that built it into the contract? And now we've got this PDF that we can sort of, use natural language searches and other innovative methods to pull it out without, sort of reinventing the wheel over and over and over again, or digging for that manually, or again, once we've dug for it, trying to understand how we got here. So that redlining piece is really cool. I'm excited to see more about that.
Yeah, this is all fantastic, and I'm glad we hit on AI. I don't think you're allowed to have a webinar nowadays without
We said AI.
yeah, without mentioning it. So we got to check that kind of that off the list as we have gone through a ton of like the different capabilities you might be looking for. What does like modern mean when the CLM space? Christina, I would also like to lean on your expertise a little bit. Way earlier, you mentioned kind of like if CLM is even the right like option for somebody to like be thinking about, do we want to go down this road? Hey, everything Max and Christina are saying is great. Like I can resonate with everything that they're kind of mentioning. So they make the decision that CLM is the right tool, or they need to kind of upgrade or put something into place. With your expertise in the operations and the implementation side, can you talk about what does it look like to introduce a new CLM, either net new or kind of replacing one that might not be getting the job done?
Sure, yeah, that's a great question. And actually, the way you framed it is thank you for the soft. That makes
Yeah.
it a lot easier to sort of respond to, because I think part of it is, if we think back to how we were talking about it earlier, this world of like chaos of, Excel spreadsheets and maybe a old on-prem piece of the puzzle that does X, and like, how do we get this all in here? I think we really need to think about, again, really in a really structured way, what piece of the puzzle, like if we're talking like net new, we've never had a CLM before and we've come to the conclusion that we need one to control this chaos, which of those pieces can and or should become part of what we consider our CLM system? So that's number one, which is really getting a broader look at the tech stack as a whole. And not just, again, is it compatible with the systems that I'm considering? So that's, again, all of these considerations we've talked about are pieces of that puzzle. And I think why it works really well. Is it even compatible with those things? If it's not, but we've sort of have narrowed down our selection, we're like, we really like this. We've never even had a CLM before. What's sort of the like, why not, I guess? It is sort of a really measured consideration of, okay, these existing pieces, like it's Excel, it's a spreadsheet, okay, great, we're not losing anything by sort of going this way. Or if it were a different example, like maybe it's like some sort of like in-house vendor database that has like a lot of really robust information that we need. Are there pieces of that should stay there that we don't need? That again, then we start thinking integration. Can we, how do we get that data in here? How can we ingest it? What have you? So that's sort of number one, is the broader tech stack. I think is huge and can't be ignored. It's one thing to be like, this is the best thing I've ever seen. And we don't care, we'll rebuild our whole tech stack around it.
Yeah.
Like, okay, that's one way to do it, I guess. But truly, I think part of the, are we solving real problems or are we causing new ones? Sometimes there might be a middle ground of like, yeah, maybe there's more challenges to consider and to work around. But again, I think if you're which is sort of my second and final piece here, is the workflow redesign piece. So I think that's it. To me, you can't really ever divorce them. You have to think about them both, and maybe separately, because it can become really crazy if you put them all together. But I don't think you can really think about, in implementing new technology without thinking through. And when I say sort of workflow, I guess it could mean two things. So I'll just also clarify both the technological process flow, how, again, we've got data flow, we've got, automation, those things. And then also, like, how is this impacting both the physical work that our people are doing, that they're used to doing, and what do they do now? But also sort of the, where do I go? What is my system of truth? Where do I go for X information? So I think the biggest thing is certainly, what I guess the like cliche or easy way to explain it is like a cut, measure twice, cut once. I would think that, it's one thing to go to a conference and go to like flashy booths and like, get, swag and be like, oh yeah, this looks great. I think it really has to be a collaborative exercise within the firm of, what is our current tech stack? What is our current human process? What is our sort of, integration pipeline of existing data? And then what do we really need to do to make it, if our decision is like, this is the, solution for us, what do we need to do to really make sure that it is a success and that we're not just causing more chaos? I think is, I know that was all pretty abstract, but I think those are sort of the most important things. I don't know, Max, you're...
Well, no, I completely agree. I was curious, in your experience, working with customers who are implementing like a CLM type solution, your experience between the customers who were coming from basically nothing, so like Excel and Word, versus those folks, and it's probably a smaller sort of cohort there, but those folks who have tried a solution, found that it didn't really meet their needs, and are now looking for a different solution, I guess, and mainly in terms of like workflow mapping and whether
I think it's a really good question, and it's one of the things that I like am really passionate about, actually. I like how simply you put it, because I think the way that I explained it is sort of like a third iteration in the like ether that we can come back to. But that, putting it that way, actually does help make it a lot more concrete and understandable why we face the issues that we do, which is again, not new to CLM. But the issue of sort of, again, just like tech selection without any sort of like real understand, like, okay, we've got to like, let's just throw some more tech at the wall and see. Sort of this like, let's pilot something, let's just POC something, let's just do it. Let's just like, get this thing and then we'll worry about it after the fact. To the point, you end up sort of with a lot of, again, I maybe like iteration is the wrong word, but you're gonna end up sort of like coming back and trying to like fix all of the pieces that don't necessarily work together. And also I think utilization and adoption is like number one issue that's always on my mind. And so like, you basically like completely missed the change management boat by like a mile. Like you didn't even get on, you missed the entry. That's number one. Number two, I think even with some sort of change management, like even if you did an amazing job being like, look at like, watch this, demo of this new product, or like they built us a proof of concept based on our tech stack, what have you, it's missing that piece of, again, how does this affect the process that I have to take? How does this affect where I go to get my information? And you could have an amazing build that actually in theory is like exactly what your firm needs, but like people are not going to use it because they don't understand it. They don't understand why. And again, they might be concerned, like this Excel spreadsheet, again, so either option, this Excel spreadsheet has everything I've ever needed. And now like I'm supposed to just go in this system and it doesn't have what I need. And then to the other point, which I think is certainly much more extreme, just like, okay, here's this fully new, technology that's not really tied in any way to our existing methods, whether it's Excel or not. Um, and now I really am like, what is this, why? Honestly, like why? I think that's the biggest thing. So
I
And
think
Max,
so.
hold on, Max, I'm going to jump in here really quick because I wanted to, Christina didn't do it, but I want to toot her horn a little bit more overtly. When you're talking about missing the boat on change management or missing the boat on adoption, um, that is where like Hike 2 like really comes into play. So I wanted to kind of like make that, yeah, toot your horn a little bit there on you all are experts. You speak the language, you know exactly what you're doing, you understand the tools. And so if you're saying to yourself, we are going to be that implementing the net new, or we're going to be kind of bringing in a new solution because the first one missed the mark, that is like why we want to talk to Christina is because Hike 2 has the expertise to make sure you do not miss that boat and it implements successfully.
I appreciate that. And it might be where Max was going here, what I'm about to say, but if not, I hope Max, you'll take a minute and just maybe think through a more eloquent way of what I'm about to say, which is kind of where I was going, that third piece of the puzzle, which is like you said, either that's like completely net new or bringing new software in. I think largely you have sort of right on a different level, two buckets. Number one, this net new, like Jordan just said, which is like this, we're coming from Excel, we're coming whatever. And largely people get excited and that's an easy one to sort of manage. And you're like, all right, like let me show you how much better this is going to be. But you never know, you still have people tied to it. The second one largely is, I would say is like, again, the exact opposite of the side of the spectrum, which is we have a CLM, which you see, I think a lot to your point these days, like you see a lot more, which is we've either had a system for a long time that really is not good enough anymore, or we just, to your point, Jordan, we just had this really poor implementation, or we just had a great implementation, but nobody is using it. What do we do now? I think that's sort of the really key part is like if you've already kind of had a poor sort of experience with a CLM product, I think it becomes all the more difficult to make sure that people understand the like why and how this is going to solve their problems. And again, a lot of the considerations that we've talked about already will feed into that decision. Like, can we, visually rebuild this workflow? Does this implement, et cetera, et cetera? But I'd really love your kind of perspective there. I think that's sort of the niche, not really niche. I think it's actually massive. I think we're in a place where people are trying a lot of technology like full throttle, like, all right, let's POC this, or let's just like get, these licenses, and then we're facing adoption and utilization challenges. I don't know if you have any thoughts on how, and then I'm happy to respond, but if you've seen any of that and where you think Intellistack maybe hits some of those marks.
Yeah, so it's funny. I completely agree, and I think it rounds us back to where we started our conversation, specifically around the pain points and how we were joking, like these pain points are faced by folks without a CLM, or if you have a CLM and it's not implemented well. That's like the real lesson there is you're not going to solve the pain points unless you actually really take the time to think through what the pain is and what solution is best positioned to actually solve that pain. Yeah, I think that's an important piece. Sorry, and then refresh me where you wanted me to go.
Yeah, I actually, you just brought me in a totally different direction and it's perfect. I think about some of the implementations that we do for, let's say, like matter management, right? And then you might end up with like 1,000 users like right away. And like that is a devastating, like, right, like they're not adopting, they're not using it, we wasted these licenses, you know, what have you. Here, maybe it would be interesting to think a little bit more about like sort of the number and type of users that are actually going to be depending on like, right, like what are the sort of use cases for CLM? And then I think that's a piece of the puzzle that probably matters a bit more here, and how it's implemented, because you're really talking about a much, I think, more narrow group of users. And so it's, I think, a little bit lighter on that front, but equally important to get it right.
Agreed. And I think with CLM in particular, as compared with like a matter management type tool, CLM is interesting because you can have a lot of different stakeholders involved in the process. And I'm thinking about like a large enterprise organization. They might have finance weighing in, they might have accounting for payment terms, they might have security, they might have privacy, they might have, yeah, there are all of these different stakeholder groups that have to interact with the process and the CLM in different capacities at different times in the process. And in my experience, that from a user adoption standpoint is one of the toughest things to manage with a CLM in particular, is because you might have a CLM that works really well for 5 out of the 9 stakeholder groups. And then you have it works decently well for 3, and it doesn't work very well for that one. And that one stops using it. And then you essentially start moving outside the CLM. You start losing, in my opinion,
Building those silos up again.
exactly. And you kind of lose a lot of the value that you were hoping to create with the CLM, in my experience, mainly because you didn't do that planning work on the front end to actually understand what you needed from the implementation. Yeah.
This is, sorry,
No, you're
Christina, do you
good.
have something else? Okay, I was gonna say this has all been so fantastic, and in the sake of time too, I want to kind of say that if you are could hear these two talk for days, or you're like, hey, I have like 12,000 questions about what they said, wanted to kind of like point out, please reach out to us. Intellistack and Hike 2, we are certified partners, so we work together all the time. And so we will always come in as a group and work with you and help answer these questions. Place yourself in the middle of this conversation and be able to kind of be asking them very specific questions about your specific organization. And so wanted to, as we kind of come to a close here, say, that please reach out to us. We'd love to talk to you more about this and kind of bring the specific answers to you. And also, if you're going to be at Dreamforce this year, so Max mentioned Salesforce, the big elephant in the room. They have a huge event called Dreamforce. I know both of our organizations are going to be there. Intellistack's going to have a booth. We'd love to see you. Christina, do you know all what Hike 2 is going to be doing?
Yeah, we last year we started a lodge at Dreamforce, and we'll have one again. So just like a sort of, you know, sort of off campus, but like place that people can go and relax and do work and eat some food and watch some of the like bigger events from, you know, without the crowding, what have you. And certainly it's a great place to kind of step aside and have some of these more specific questions. Setting up, you know, set up a meeting with Max or whoever, what have you, on the Intellistack side, and they'll reach out and make sure that someone on the Hike 2 side, you know, maybe you all can get together and we can do that. But yeah, we'll definitely be there, and we're excited about it, and certainly excited for your lunch.
Yeah, that's perfect. And then also, you two are really the stars of the show, so I'm not going to be the one with the last word. I want to give Max and Christina, you both kind of an opportunity to kind of give your closing thoughts too, of, you know, whether it be anything that we talked about, a summarization of your thoughts. But Max, I can kind of kick it to you, and then Christina, the guest of honor, can have the final words.
Yeah. So I think for a couple of closing thoughts from my side, I think taking a step back, we've talked a whole lot about kind of CLM and the pain points that it can solve for. I think taking a quick step back and also thinking about kind of how CLM, because we talked about the various stakeholder groups, thinking about how CLM impacts the broader business can really help drive the value conversation. So maybe you as a legal leader, you realize, yes, I absolutely need a CLM. This is not good. So you need to go talk to your CFO and get budget for that kind of tool. A lot of the business case around that can be a little bit amorphous because you have a process that kind of works technically. So thinking about terms like contract value leakage, that's like where you miss an auto renewal deadline, or when you fail to actually uplift a customer based on an escalator that you have in the agreement, that's all value leakage. Also think about the cost of labor on those low value tasks. And then finally, CFOs do like this piece, or rather they like getting rid of revenue delay. So if cycle time hits your business, CLM can definitely help there. And yeah, one other final thought, just think it's really neat that Intellistack is building CLM on top of our Streamline offering, which is really that data fabric and workflow connection piece. And I think having that as a base is also really exciting when you think about other applications across the business, vendor consolidation, and all those pieces. But probably going to save some of those thoughts for a future chat. So that's
yeah, I know. I'm like, we could chat for an hour, probably about any one of these lines of conversation. I definitely want to hit again on the first point that you made. You know, on the change management side, and certainly like every time I've spoken at ILTACon or elsewhere on change management, it's almost always one of the follow-up questions, which are like, people get really excited and then they're like, okay, but like, how do I present the value to like my, you know, the people that are making the buying decisions, the financial decisions, when like we don't have the, to your point, right? Like because we're living in like Excel world or whatever, we don't even have data to show them what that ROI will be. I think those are really good examples of, you know, these are just innate in like what we're talking about here. And so like, again, to the point, being able, even if it feels a bit more abstract, having some of that information is great. So I really love that you threw that in, and think that people will definitely be interested as they're making these, you know, decisions. I think it helps to come prepared to say like, what is the value that I can, you know, propose for this. So I think that's a really great one. From there, I would just add as my last piece, I know Jordan kind of gave us a shout out, so thank you for that. I will say genuinely, you know, at first part you might be like, what are you doing, Christina? But you'll see where I'm going. But we really are, you know, tech and platform agnostic. We're massive Salesforce partners, right? So like we talk about CRM a lot, abstracted from, you know, that software. And certainly here, you know, we're certified Intellistack partners, and we love working with you all, and we think you have great solutions. So that's certainly part of it. But I think I want to add just that, knowing that we are, you know, really tech stack agnostic and platform agnostic here, that we love being able to work with, you know, really good technologies, and B, you know, technologies where there is sort of an understanding and sort of focus on the like, is this the right solution for you? And if so, how do we really think about, you know, really doing a great job of implementing and integrating it in a way that will bring value rather than more chaos. So I just wanted to sort of add that about our partnership as well, to make clear that, you know, I think that all the things we've talked about sort of this Intellistack product specifically, are reasons why I think when implementations go well, that's sort of why, and we're really excited to work with you all on this project.
Absolutely perfect. Well, thank you both. We will get the links to the Hike to Lodge, contact information, everything to you with kind of in the show notes, or any kind of place that we can put comments and links. So appreciate everybody's time. Thank you both for joining us and talking through the CLM. I hope everybody has a fantastic day. See ya.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.